Well, good evening, everyone. And again, I can't see you, so I hope somebody will adjust the lights. Much better. Yes. A little more, a little more.
Ooh, now I can see him.
Okay, that's a little better. Okay, without blinding us. Okay, well, I'm David Rubin, the Brown Foundation Curator of Contemporary Art here at SAMA, and it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to this evening's program, a conversation with the artists of SAMOMA. And I want to recognize first all the members of SAMA Contemporaries who have sponsored the exhibition and this program. We're grateful for your support through your membership in SAMA Contemporaries. Also, before we begin, I want to remind everyone that 2 weeks from tonight, we will be having a panel called Artists Take Initiative, Artist-Run Spaces in San Antonio today, where I'll be interviewing 4 artists who run spaces today. And who set the stage for that? But these artists here who operated one of the very first artist-run spaces in San Antonio, SAMOMA. And so first I want to introduce everyone. At the far end is George Horner.
Hello.
And in the center there is Donjon Evans.
Simsalabim.
And to my right is Norman Rene Avila. All right, gentlemen. I thought we'd begin with George, who's come in from New York to be with us tonight. And George, and then the others can add to what George might leave out. So the first question I have for you all is, how and why did SAMOMA start in 1976?
Well, there were a number of events that sort of led up to it, and I mean, there was the kind of a number of like pop-up events, like the Flame of the Forest that we did over on Rainbow, and then we did like a Joseph Boys information show. We did the Eve Klein information show at Don and Cheryl's house, and in '73 we opened up the first gallery over on Austin Street, and it was the Mutagenic Muster Gallery. And we had rented it from an artist friend of ours, but it was short-lived, and so it didn't really ever manifest itself. But the impetus to have a space was growing, and it was growing for years. And we were involved in Key Flow Turtle, which was a performance group, and so we needed a space because we would do these performances in bars, and we just there was a need for a space. So
how did you all sort of meet in the first place to sort of feel a common identity as artists? How did you find one another to begin with? Don?
Well,
Yellow Pages, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I called up 1-800-ARTIST. No, but seriously, Norman and I went to Trinity University, and I think it was around spring of 70, I want to say 72, and we had a printmaking class, and we met and kind of started going, and then about 6 months later, we met George,
And George, were you out of school or still in school, or what was the deal there?
I think I had met you earlier, Don, like kind of through the Water Brothers.
Well,
and through,
yeah.
Don was living in Austin.
We met originally back in about 1969, but it was very brief. Mm-hmm. And then at about 72, we all hooked up together. And once we hooked up, we just started the ball rolling. We just started doing all kinds of things. The activity was real frenetic. And like George said, we did a San Antonio, at the time, from about 1970 to about 76, there really wasn't anything going on in town. There was one show every year, this annual show that they held at the Whitty, put on by the San Antonio Art Group. And
it was a starving artist show.
Yeah, you would usually send in your money, and of course, we were doing Vanguard art, so they'd always reject us, So that was kind of the impetus. We entered that last show that they had, the San Antonio Artists Group, and it was held over at the Kaler House, and we got rejected. Well, George got accepted, but we got rejected. So we went, this is the last time we're going to have others deciding about what we think is valuable art. And that was pretty much when we said, we're going to start our own thing.
Yeah. So
and
we
Norman,
put together the
do
rejection
you have anything
show.
to add about
Oh,
that?
yeah, a lot. Well, you know, originally there was the Consafo group, and they had group space, and then they
You want to, just for those who
existed.
don't know what Consafo was, you want
Well, yeah, well, it was, but before that, there was a group even called the Men of Art Guild, and there were some very, very distinguished people that were in that. But the Whitty Museum, the Consafo group was a Chicano-based, and we had 2 artists from that group show at SAMOMA, Rudy Trevino and Robert Gonzalez.
And Felipe Reyes.
And Felipe Reyes, yeah.
Let's get back to the beginning.
So what happened is that the Whitty Museum housed the art department, but we were going. You guys went to New York with Cheryl, and they took a trip up there, and we were going to Mexico City. We were going to Houston and Dallas and different places, and we were checking everything out. And
To look at art.
yes, to look at art, and we brought back all these ideas about what it was about, what we should do, and what we wanted to do.
And what we could do.
Yeah, and so that's what we.
So,
you know.
so George, which artists, though, overall were the biggest influences, you know, when you were first starting out? Who did you see as your role models as artists from art history, for example? Like earlier 20th century.
Earlier 20th century?
Well, I mean, there were certain artists that became real important to you in your founding.
Yeah, well, Duchamp, obviously.
And Picasso is the other one.
Yeah.
Like the name, you probably have seen this image. It's the Mutt Cubist. That was a name that we chose for ourselves because we were wondering, you know, who really influenced us, and we decided that the people that really influenced us was Pablo Picasso and Marcel Duchamp.
And why was it? What was it, Norman, that you liked about their work or about them?
One was intellectual because, you know, after he stopped painting, then he started doing the ready-mades and all.
You're
That's
talking
play
about
on
Marcel
words,
Duchamp.
Duchamp. And then Picasso never stopped doing the image. He never did an abstract. He was always a people. It was always an animal or a situation. But he painted from the heart, and he painted amazing images, which 35,000, it's estimated, artworks. So he was the soul, and then the other one was the intellect. So he melded them together, and the idea about Mutt being from the urinal, the signed urinal by
Marcel Duchamp's piece, which was a urinal, was signed R. Mutt as an alias.
Yes, and so we weren't true Cubists because we used the elements of Cubism, but so we were Mutts. We were hybrids. We weren't. Had we been, we would have had to have been.
You were like a hybrid of the original Cubism.
Yes.
That had been sort of gone through a number of generations by now. And George, tell us about then. You said there was this rejection show that you were in and the others weren't, and how did you guys respond to that?
Yeah, yeah, I was accepted in the show, but not everyone was, so we were really upset about that. So we decided that we would just go ahead and mount our own exhibition. So it was on the porch of Richard and Alice Rodney. Alice is here right now. And so we mounted literally on their porch. And what street was that on? I'm trying to remember.
Craig.
On
It was
Craig,
on Craig.
yeah. And so it was great. It was just an outdoor exhibition, and we kind of walked around and hand out flyers. This image was on there of the old RCA Victor listening to the, you know, but this is like listening to his
How did you
master's
promote
voice.
I
it?
did
How
that.
did you publicize it? You didn't have social media in those days.
Well, we literally just walked around and handed out flyers and just phoned people and word of mouth and that sort of thing. There wasn't Facebook to sort of broadcast it at all. So
If you see the slideshow in the film, you can see the Mutt Cubist rejection show on the porch of
On the PowerPoint.
Yeah. And it's
So after that point, that's when at that point we really realized that we needed a space. That
Yeah.
we were tired.
Henry
So
was
how
in
did you
that.
how did you find the space, Don?
Well, I just want to interject. I mean, how we looked at it and why we wanted to start is because, as an example, they accepted George's piece, and it was a neon piece. When they accepted the piece for, you know, to bring it into the show that we rejected against, they did not even plug in the neon. So, in other words, they looked at the piece, you know, not completely. Because to
In other words,
truly
they
evaluate
didn't
the piece,
get it.
you
They
got to
didn't
plug in
understand
the
it.
neon.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So Norman, how did you guys find your first space when you really got serious about this?
Well, the thing was the money aspect of it, because we paid for it. So we were driving around and we found the space on Woodlawn, North Florida as in Woodlawn, and we went upstairs and it said for rent, and we went upstairs and it was a mess. But we were familiar with that building because Henry Stein. We shot a film there called Henry Stein, Henri, Eureka, and Clean Sweep in that building. And he actually lived there, and other people lived there. But they had torn out all these walls that were small little apartments, and there were holes in the floor, and there was holes in the ceilings, and there was big black electrical cords hanging out of this, and we looked around and we went, we'll take it.
It's our kind of place.
Yeah.
It definitely needed some work, to say the least.
But
yeah.
it felt right somehow.
Yeah.
It was a big open space, and it sort of reminded us of some of the spaces that we saw in New York, all these bombed out buildings that people just hung beautiful art
What
in.
Soho was like when
Exactly.
Yeah,
first
you know,
was
we
the
walked
70s,
into this
yeah.
one gallery, and it was like a burnout building, but all on the walls was like Andy Warhol's diamond dust paintings, you know? So we started thinking, you know, well, what is a museum? And so George looked up in the dictionary, what is a museum? And so it said, where the muses hang out. And so we thought, well, that's what this place is going to be, because it's going to be a place where the muses hang out.
It
you
needed
know?
So
be
is that why you
amusing.
called it a museum, or were there other reasons?
Well, initially that was one of the reasons, but I think we also just kind of wanted the first gallery opened was the Munich Muster Gallery, right? So, you know, we already kind of went that route, like a quirky name gallery. But so we wanted to go another direction and sort of, it's almost like instant credibility in a way. And then we also thought, well, we're going at some point try to get nonprofit status. So that would probably help us. So and then we just also thought it would piss people off, you know.
But it
So
never.
you had the gall to call it
Yeah,
a
we
museum.
had
Yeah,
the gall to call ourselves.
It never
a
did.
museum,
Nobody,
you know.
not one person has ever asked me about that. Whether who do you? No, the thing also
piss
was
anyone
that
off,
that we were not a art for money gallery. We weren't going to make it on selling the art, and then
So how did you fund it?
we paid for it out of our own pockets.
Yeah, we realized over a 3-year period that we spent about $15,000
Yeah,
out of our own
in
pocket.
'77 money. We're
And
talking
because
back
we,
then.
we believed in that this town needed to see art and see
Modern
modern art,
art.
before they could really appreciate it, because there wasn't any place that was offering a mouthpiece to present these ideas. So we said, well, how can San Antonio know about this stuff?
Not
They
only
need to be
modern art,
presented. They need to be presented, with
Contemporary
these
art.
ideas.
Yeah, contemporary art, but also, I mean, there was the McNay, and the McNay has beautiful, beautiful pieces. I was just there today, and lovely, lovely place. And I was looking for, talk about mutt cubism. You know,
Yeah.
that was the piece it's at the McNay. It's one of Picasso's very first cubist pieces. So that
I say the
that was
first.
really a very influential piece to me as a young man, as an artist, discovering Picasso at a very young age. So, but
When we did that, when we opened up the SAMOMA, I was a teacher, and I also said that this way we could rent. We rented movies from MoMA because it said SAMOMA, and then we got a movie on the first that I know of, a Frida Kahlo movie here, and we showed that, and a Renee Magritte and a Susan Pitt Cranning. And they were from the collection of MoMA, and we also, I mean, you say it lightly, but we gave this lawyer artwork. I gave a piece, George gave a large piece, Don gave a piece to this, and eventually we did get nonprofit organizational status, and we even qualified for a grant of $2,500, and it was in the newspaper. But we were done. We kind of burnt out. We were
So
we
the
were ready
grant
to
came
move
like
on.
after the third year.
At the
yeah,
very end.
yeah. Well, it was also a matter of the reason we started in the first place was because we were tired of the bureaucracy, and we were tired of people rejecting us and telling us what we could do and what we couldn't do. So suddenly, when we were pursuing that nonprofit status, it was kind of the same thing. Okay, well, you're gonna have to write up budgets, and you're gonna have to do this. And we at one point we did a benefit, a fundraiser for Gene Elder, who was running for mayor at the time, on the party. You know, so it started this like this absurd. But he was promoting the arts. You know, as a mayoral candidate, his whole platform was the arts. Genius, really. I mean, it's sort of like the city needs to, really support
So can we
arts to bring
credit
in revenue.
Gene with the fact that now San Antonio is becoming known as an arts
Well,
city?
no, I wouldn't say that, but maybe.
Well,
But it was great. But it was sort of. But there was some reporter made some snide comment. It was like, well, SAMOMA, now that they're nonprofit status and getting money from the city, should they really be promoting a
political
mayoral
agenda.
candidate? And when we read that, it was like, we're out of here. We don't need that money. We don't need it. We're not going that way. That's not what we were about.
Just as an example, our first show that we had, the actual show, was Ron Cohen's project.
So who was Ron Cohen?
Ron Cohen was a professor at UTSA that caused a lot of problems there and at the Whitty. He was censored at the Whitty, and a lot of artists took down professors took down their work. It was in the newspaper. It was Roddy Stinson wrote about it. These are some old names, but so the first show is that large space, and there were 10 radios in 10 paper bags. He came up with the idea. We implemented it. It was one of my radios was in that bag, and he tuned them to a different station, every one, and then he stapled them together, and then the cords ran down to them, and that was the show.
So,
I mean,
so let me ask: were people talking about John Cage then at the time? Was John Cage an influence on that?
Well, I don't know whether Cohen knew about it, but my master, Frank Hine, had turned me on to John Cage in 67 or 68. So those ideas were in the air, for sure.
We met him. He was brought here for the Third Coast.
Yeah.
The Third Coast.
We got to meet
Cisneros,
Cage.
and when they were doing that.
But with the impetus for Cohen's piece, he'd just done a show in Kerrville or something, someplace like that, about nothing. And he said, I want to do a show about everything. So he thought the best way to do that would have these 10 radios all turned to 10 different channels. It's like just a smorgasbord of culture,
cacophony.
A cacophony of sound hitting you at once, You walk in this room and there's all of this noise. And of course, the public reacted. They started speaking louder, so they could talk over the radios. So at the end of the show, Norman went over and we had all of the radios hooked up to one switch, and he did all the 10 radios, turned them off, and the silence really was deafening.
It created a vacuum. What happened was that as people walked up the stairs, they came in, and then they started mingling. And the volume on the radios never changed at all. They became secondary because there was so much chatter. And then as the people started leaving again, then the radios, as if they were turned up, but they weren't. And then it was loud again, and then when it turned it off, it was like it actually was a void, a vacuum.
I remember people started applauding.
Yeah.
It was quiet
So
for
it was
about
like a
3
performance.
seconds. It was beautiful, and then
Yeah.
everyone just broke.
Now,
See,
you guys, let
was
me ask
great.
you about your programming, because you didn't only do exhibitions, you did lectures and performances. I mean, first of all, how did you decide, what to program, and then what were some of the more memorable programs that you did, Don?
Well, what made us decide what we would do as programs is our personal interests, pretty much.
Yeah.
One of the programs that was pretty interesting was we had a fellow student of mine, Ted Pope, that I went to school with. He had been, 3 years previous of SAMOMA, he'd been stationed on the island of Samoa as an anthropologist.
Which was the acronym for SAMA,
Yeah,
before.
so
SAMA was
he gave a
Samoa.
lecture on how the Samoans perceive art, because they have no conception of art at all. everything is made for, utilitarian. And he would try to explain to the Samoans, about art, and they couldn't grasp that idea. Something independently hanging on the wall, and, that's art. They had no concept for that. So that was one interesting show. Another interesting one was Frank Krasnowski, a professor from Trinity University. He had a collection of concrete poetry that he had amassed from all over the world, and we presented that. And
It's a beautiful show. It
we
really was.
actually, the Muck Cubists, the three of us who actually put that show, we hung it for him, and we kind of tried to make it look like a big concrete poem. And we had audience participation. George had cut out all of these headlines from the Express and News, like one words, and we had a big board, and people could come up and start making their own poems or writings
On the
using these
wall.
letters on the wall.
And
So
they'd go
that was
take
an
them all
That was a
down.
really interesting show.
There's a
audience participation was
There's a
amazing.
16 millimeter with sound film of that by Ron Zimmerman, but I haven't seen Ron Zimmerman in years. I would love to see that because it was spectacular. I really love that show. What we were doing is we were educating ourselves and educating everyone else because we didn't see any boundaries as to what it was, and we had everything from happenings to environments to lectures to films to
Musical
music,
performances.
electronic music.
Puppet plays.
As a side note, you probably heard of Los Number 3 dinners or Los Number 2 dinners. The first time they played was at SAMOMA during this thing called the Arts March Survival Kit.
Bongo Joe played at Samoma one night, which was
So,
very
George
good.
Coleman.
That was
what we
fantastic.
called art, anything could be labeled as art. As you can see, the Cohen piece, with the 10 radios, we wanted to come out with a bang and really shock people, and go like, whoa. And I think we did it with that first show with Cohen, and we tried to keep the level up,
Mel
after that.
Casas told me about Rudy Trevino, and then because he was in the original Kutsafos group, and when he had his show, it was a wonderful show. And when we got there, mariachis came up the stairs, and they started playing at the opening, and it was unheard of. It was wonderful,
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, you were in 2 different locations. So the first one, you've told us a little bit about that one. Why did you leave there and move to another, in Norman?
What happened was that after we'd made all the improvements and Anthony downstairs, the landlord, he told us not to get on the roof, and we got on the roof, and then he told us this and that, and then anyway, so he raised the rent, and we got incensed about it because we had done all these improvements. The walls were white. We had sanded the floors, and it was livable. People actually lived there. In an artist, like with roped off, and it said "artist lives here." Actually, but it was that big. That the space was that big. Well, when he did that, then we went, well, we moved, and I kicked a hole in the wall, and we left, and then the Woodlawn Cooperative Gallery moved in, and there was 40 artists, and they had shows there. I think it maybe lasted 3 months, but everybody wanted to show, but nobody wanted to paint the walls or sit at the.
This is the group
yeah.
that moved in there, but let's
Yes.
talk about your second location.
Yeah,
Well, also,
then we found
yeah.
a really nice space also, and it was great.
George, you want to tell us about
Well, I
it?
just wanted to say the other space was 531 West Woodlawn, right on the corner of Flores. But it was Anthony's pawn shop was downstairs, and we were upstairs. And I had lived there for a while, but it was kind of spooky and creepy at night there, so I didn't stay there very long. But we had no real security. We had, there was a fire escape in the back, and I think at one point, I thought this is what had happened. I do remember him raising the rent, but I seem to vaguely remember that somebody had broken into it
We got
and
broke
ripped
in.
the
We got
floor out,
burglarized.
and they broke into the pawn shop. So Anthony kind of saw us as a liability, and he was like, "You guys out." So Anthony
No,
raised
because